Have you ever been moments away from changing the world only to realize that a single missing piece might destroy everything? The sky over San Arden was streaked with soft golden light, but inside the 30th floor of Reeves Technologies, all warmth had vanished. Daniel Reeves stood silently in front of the vast glass window, looking down at the city that had once seemed so full of promise. His reflection stared back at him, tired eyes, clenched jaw, and a heart weighed down by the unbearable fear of failure. 10 years of work, 10 years of sleepless nights, missed birthdays, sacrificed relationships, and relentless innovation. His software Medivo was unlike anything the world had seen. It could predict strokes before symptoms even appeared. It had the potential to save millions of lives, but the dream was expensive, and without the final funding deal, Reeves Technologies would not survive another month. He glanced at the digital clock on the far wall. Las 10:47 alto m. In exactly 73 minutes, the most critical meeting of his life would begin. 2 investors were flying in from Osaka, Mr. Daichi Nomura and Ms. Hana Kobayashi. They represented Takeda Horizons, a healthcare tech conglomerate that had already revolutionized medical systems in East Asia. Their investment could launch Medivolt globally. But there was a problem Daniel hadn't planned for. A silent, invisible problem that had arrived just this morning and now stood like a wall between him and everything he'd worked for. His lead interpreter, Keiso Tanakath, the only person fluent in both medical, English and business-level Japanese, had collapsed from sudden appendicitis at dawn. She was rushed into emergency surgery, unconscious and unavailable. There was no one to replace her, no one who understood both the science and the language, and certainly not in such short notice. Daniel had called every agency, every university, every connection he had. It was too late. No one could prepare for a pitch like this in under 2 hours, not when billions were at stake, not when precision mattered more than passion. He rubbed his face, trying to stay calm, but the panic was real. What was he supposed to do? Hand over a presentation in English and hope it was enough? Smile politely while vital nuances were lost in translation? The Osaka team spoke limited English, and Daniel's Japanese barely stretched beyond greetings and polite phrases. Investors didn't fund what they didn't understand, and Takeda Horizons had a reputation. They were meticulous, detailed, and they valued clear communication. They believed in honor, not hype. One misstep could mean disaster. A knock interrupted his spiral. It was Marcus, the building's longtime janitor, an older man, always quiet, always polite, always invisible in the rush of corporate urgency. He stood awkwardly in the doorway, hat in hand, shoes squeaking against the polished floor. "I'm sorry to bother you, Mr. Reeves," Marcus said, eyes lowered. "My daughter's with me today. School's out unexpectedly. She'll stay out of the way, I promise." Daniel blinked. He'd seen Marcus around for years but never spoken to him beyond a polite nod. "Of course, Marcus. It's fine. Just, please, make sure she stays away from the top floors. We've got an important meeting coming up." Marcus nodded, grateful. "Thank you, sir." Daniel turned back to the window. He wasn't thinking about janitors or children. He was trying to remember if there was any way to delay the meeting, to request more time. But he knew the answer. These investors had flown 11 hours to get here. This was the only shot. The next hour passed in a blur of pacing, phone calls, and failed solutions. His team tried to cobble together visual aids and diagrams. Someone suggested using translation apps, but the language of business and medicine was far too nuanced for an algorithm to handle. Finally, at 11:56 a.m., Daniel stood outside the glass conference room, watching as Mr. Nomura and Ms. Kobayashi were ushered in. With polite bows and greetings, they looked around curiously, impressed by the office, but clearly waiting for something more. Clarity, connection, respect. He stepped inside, heart pounding. He began to speak slowly, carefully, using the simplest words he could muster. Charts appeared on the screen, graphs, diagrams. He pointed, he smiled, he tried, and he watched as the light in their eyes dimmed. Confusion settled in, a missed question, a misunderstood answer. The gulf between them widened, word by word. Then, just as he was about to reach the slide on predictive diagnostics, the door to the conference room creaked open. Everyone turned. In the doorway stood a small girl, no older than 8, holding a tattered children's book and blinking at the adults in confusion. She looked from Daniel to the investors, then back to her father Marcus, who appeared behind her, breathless. "I'm so sorry," Marcus whispered. "She wandered off. I'll take her." But before he could, the girl took a step forward. She looked directly at Mr. Nomura and bowed. Then, in perfect fluid Japanese, she said, "Excuse me, sir. I believe Mr. Reeves is trying to explain something very important about saving lives. May I help translate?" The room fell into stunned silence. Daniel stared at her. So did the investors. Even the executive assistant at the back of the room dropped her pen. Mr. Nomura blinked, then smiled gently. "You speak Japanese?" The little girl nodded. "My mom taught me. She's from Nagasaki. I helped my dad read her old books." Ms. Kobayashi leaned forward, intrigued. "Can you explain what he just said?" And with that, the child walked to the front of the room, climbed up into the nearest chair, and turned toward the screen. She translated each slide, word for word, switching between English and Japanese with ease far beyond her age. And as she spoke, something incredible began to happen. The confusion lifted. The room leaned in. The investors nodded, asked questions, smiled. The gap had been bridged not by a professional, not by an adult with a resume, but by a girl in sneakers and a ponytail, who understood every word and spoke with quiet, unwavering confidence. Daniel couldn't believe what he was witnessing. The end of the presentation, Mr. Nomura stood, offered his hand, and said in English, "Mr. Reeves, we look forward to partnering with you." As they left, Ms. Kobayashi paused beside the little girl and said softly, "Your mother would be proud." Daniel sat in stunned silence, heart racing, gratitude rising like a tide. He looked at Marcus, who had tears in his eyes. "What's her name?" Daniel asked. "Hope," Marcus whispered. "Her name is Hope." And Daniel realized that was exactly what she'd just given him. The room emptied slowly, but Daniel Reeves didn't move. He remained seated at the edge of the long, glass conference table, staring at the empty chair where the janitor's daughter had just performed what could only be described as a miracle. Around him, the world buzzed, his assistant whispering updates, security guiding the investors back to the elevator. But all he could hear was the echo of her voice, calm and clear, carrying across the divide of cultures, saving the company he had built from nothing. He ran a hand down his face, overwhelmed not just by what had happened, but by what it meant. Not just the funding, it was more than that. It was the humbling reminder that help doesn't always come in the form of polished resumes or well-dressed executives. Sometimes, it comes in sneakers and innocence, from someone no one saw coming. The door opened quietly again. This time, it was Marcus. He stepped inside with his cap folded nervously in his hands, shoulders stiff as though unsure whether he was welcome. Daniel stood quickly. "Marcus," he said, walking toward him. "Please come in." Marcus hesitated. I just wanted to apologize, sir." She didn't mean to interrupt. "I know this is a serious place, and she shouldn't have." "Marcus," Daniel interrupted. Gently, "she saved my company." The janitor blinked, his eyes already moist. "She did." Daniel nodded, a breath catching in his throat. "I don't know how to thank you. Or her." There was a long silence between them. Marcus finally said, "She's always had a way with words. She reads everything she can find. Doesn't matter what language, it just sticks. Her mum taught her Japanese before she passed away. It's how they stayed connected to her heritage." Daniel felt a lump rise in his throat. "She's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant." A few moments later, Hope appeared in the doorway again, hugging her tattered book like it was a treasure. She looked unsure, like she was about to get in trouble. But when Daniel knelt down to meet her at eye level, her worried expression eased. "I wanted to say thank you," he said softly. "You didn't just help me, you helped everyone who works here. You helped people we haven't even met yet, people this technology will save." Hope looked down, her cheeks pink. "I just wanted to help Daddy." Daniel smiled. "You did more than that." As they left, Daniel turned to his assistant and said, "Find a way to bring her back, not as a guest, as part of our future." That afternoon, word spread like wildfire throughout the company. From the software engineers on the 12th floor to the cafeteria staff in the basement, everyone heard the story. The girl who had stepped in when no one else could. The janitor's daughter who'd bridged a billion-dollar deal. People smiled wider that day. They worked harder, not out of fear or deadlines, but out of pride, because now they weren't just building software, they were part of something bigger. But as the celebration buzzed around him, Daniel knew one thing for certain. This story wasn't over. In fact, the real challenge was just beginning, because now, with new investors, came new expectations, higher stakes, bigger goals, and deeper scrutiny. The very next morning, the investors requested a full demonstration in Tokyo Live, in person, with a panel of medical experts and government officials. Daniel agreed instantly, his heart pounding. He knew the software could speak for itself, but without Keiko, without someone to translate both the language and the meaning behind his vision, the gap could open all over again. He thought of hope, a child, a miracle. Yes, but could he really ask her to do more? Still, he found himself dialing Marcus's number that evening. "I wanted to ask you something," he said. "Something important." Marcus was quiet. "Is this about Japan?" Daniel hesitated. "I know it's a lot. She's just a child, and this is a massive responsibility. But if she's willing, I'd like her to come. And you, too. As our guests, no pressure, of course." Marcus didn't answer right away. Then came a quiet, steady voice, Hope's voice in the background. "Daddy, I want to help again, if I can." And in that moment, Daniel felt something shift deep inside him. It wasn't just about saving a company anymore. It was about honoring the courage of a little girl who refused to let language or status or expectations define what she could do. The trip was arranged in record time, passports expedited, flights booked. The board was skeptical at first, bringing a child to such a high-stakes meeting. It was unheard of, but Daniel insisted. He wouldn't betray the very heart of what had saved them. 3 days later, Daniel, Marcus, and Hope stepped off the plane into a glowing Tokyo sunrise. As they rode to the conference center, Daniel looked out at the sprawling city and felt both the weight and wonder of what lay ahead. He glanced at Hope, who was humming quietly to herself, looking out the window with wide eyes. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. She shrugged with a small smile. "Just hoping I say the right words." And somehow, Daniel knew she would, because sometimes the smallest voices carry the greatest truths. And this little girl, she was about to stand before some of the world's most brilliant minds and show them all that courage, clarity, and heart can speak louder than anything else. The conference center in Tokyo loomed like a glass cathedral, modern and commanding, perched in the heart of the city. Crowds bustled past in organized wavesuits, lanyards, briefcases, headsets. It was the kind of place where reputations were made in minutes, or lost just as quickly. Daniel Reeves stepped through the revolving doors with his heart pounding, every breath laced with doubt. Despite months of planning, 10 years of building, and one miraculous little girl who had opened the door to this moment, he still felt like a man walking a tightrope above a canyon. Hope walked quietly at his side, her hand gently holding the hem of her father's blazer, her eyes wide but steady. She wasn't nervous in the same way Daniel was. She was curious about the giant screens flashing medical breakthroughs in neon blue, curious about the different languages swirling through the air, curious about the rows of men and women with sharp eyes and slower smiles. She was absorbing it all, like she always did. The main hall was enormous rows of chairs lined up before a towering stage, flanked by digital banners displaying the names of the presenting companies. Some were billion-dollar conglomerates, others were fast-moving startups, and sandwiched somewhere in between, in small white letters, was the name Reeves Technologist. Daniel was guided to a waiting area by a young assistant. He shook hands, he smiled politely, but inside, he was rehearsing every part of his pitching slide, every phrase, every technical detail, and yet, the one part he couldn't control was what sat beside him now. A little girl reading a Japanese picture book upside down, completely unfazed. "Hope," he said quietly, "are you sure you're okay doing this?" She looked up at him. "Do you believe in your idea?" Daniel blinked. "Yes, of course." "Then I'm okay. Because if you believe it's good, I just have to help you say it." It was such a simple answer, but it settled something deep inside him. Then the doors to the main stage opened. Inside, an audience of nearly 1,000 executives, journalists, and government officials took their seats. Lights dimmed. Presenters before him spoke of AI in surgery, robotics and elderly care, gene editing therapy. Each had sleek visuals, polished translators, rehearsed performances, and then it was Daniel's turn. The announcer called out, representing Reeves Technologies from the United States, Daniel Reeves, accompanied by his interpreter, Murmurs rose when people noticed the interpreter was a child. Daniel felt the heat of hundreds of eyes on him as he climbed the stage, heart pounding. He wasn't sure what he feared more, judgment or failure, but hope. She walked up beside him like it was just another Tuesday. He took a breath and began, "Good afternoon. What I'm about to share with you is not just a software, it's a lifeline." Hope translated each word into elegant, fluent Japanese, her voice clear and composed, her pacing effortless. Daniel continued, slowly gaining confidence. "We call it Motivational. It uses biometric signals, historical data, and machine learning to predict strokes, days, sometimes even weeks before they happen." Hope translated, her small hands gesturing naturally as she spoke. The audience began to lean in. He described case studies. She translated. He showed live demos. She kept pace, and something incredible started to unfold. The crowd wasn't just listening, they were connecting. Not to him, to her, to the child who spoke with sincerity that no corporate pitch could match. Halfway through, a hand went up from the front row, a respected neurologist from Kyoto. "How do you plan to adapt this software for rural clinics with limited internet access?" Daniel froze for a moment, unsure how to phrase it in a way that would translate well. But before he could speak, Hope stepped forward and answered politely, fluently, and correctly. She had heard Daniel explain it to his team on the flight. She remembered. The room went quiet. Then a wave of quiet murmurs, impressed nods, and finally, applause. When the presentation ended, the panel stood. One of the officials approached Daniel and offered a bow. "We see hundreds of technologies," he said, "but very few that combine innovation with true human understanding." He looked at Hope. "Your voice is small, but your heart is immense." Afterward, in the green room, Daniel sat down and exhaled for the first time in hours. Marcus walked in holding 2 cups of tea, his face glowing with pride. "You see," he said quietly, "she didn't need permission to be brilliant." Hope walked in behind him, holding a paper crane someone had given her backstage. "They said it means peace and good luck," she said, handing it to Daniel. He looked at the delicate folds, stunned by how something so small could hold such meaning. That night, an email arrived, official confirmation from Takeda Horizons. They would not only invest, they would partner on a 5-year global expansion, but perhaps more remarkable than the funding, or the standing ovation, or even the flood of interest that followed, was what happened the next morning. Hope was offered a scholarship, not from one school, from 3. One of the deans, in her letter, wrote, "Brilliance is not in what we're born into, but in what we dare to reach for. Your daughter has already reached further than most adults ever will." Marcus wept when he read it, and Daniel made a quiet promise to himself. If his company was going to change lives, it would start by honoring the one that had changed his, because no matter how powerful a tool was, no matter how advanced the technology, it would always be people, real, ordinary, extraordinary people who made the difference. And somewhere deep in Tokyo, a little girl named Hope was just getting started. A month had passed since the Tokyo presentation, but the world hadn't stopped talking about it. News outlets dubbed it the miracle pitch. Business journals ran headlines like "The Janitor's Daughter Who Saved a Company." On social media, clips of Hope translating for Daniel had gone viral, inspiring millions with her calm confidence and uncanny intelligence. But while the world was celebrating, Daniel Reeves was pacing. The deal with Takeda Horizons was finalized. Yes, but now the real work had begun. Teams across 3 continents were building, updating, and integrating Motivational into clinics and hospitals. Deadlines were tight. Expectations were sky high. Every investor wanted weekly updates, and while Daniel had built this company from the ground up, he'd never led anything of this scale before. One night, he sat alone in the office, staring at the glowing city skyline. The silence was heavy. His team was tired. His lead developer had just resigned under pressure, and one of the international licensing contracts had fallen through at the last minute, threatening an entire branch of the launch. Daniel buried his face in his hands. For the first time, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: doubt. Not in the product, but in himself. Could he really do this? Had he let that Tokyo moment blind him to the mountains still ahead? Then, a quiet knock on his door. It opened slowly, revealing Marcus and Hope. She was holding a small paper bag, eyes lighting. "Up the dim room, we brought dinner," Marcus said. "You've been in here for 14 hours. Daniel blinked. "I didn't even realize." Hope stepped forward and handed him the bag. "It's your favorite, spicy dumplings." He took it, heart warming at the gesture. "You remembered. You said it after the Tokyo meeting," she replied. "When you were smiling really big." He chuckled, the tension in his chest easing just a bit. "Yeah, I guess I did." Marcus sat down across from him. "I know this part is hard," he said gently. "People think the miracle was what happened in Tokyo, but the real miracle is choosing to keep going when it's not easy, when the cameras are off." Daniel leaned back, exhaustion catching up to him. "I keep wondering if I'm enough for this, if I have what it takes." Hope, sitting on the couch now with her legs swinging off the edge, looked up. "You don't have to be perfect, Mr. Daniel. You just have to care enough to try again tomorrow." The simplicity of it hit him harder than any boardroom pep talk ever could. The next day, something changed in the way Daniel led. Instead of trying to be the infallible CEO, he opened up to his team. He told them the truth, that they were in unknown waters, that mistakes would happen, but that what they were building mattered, and he believed in them. That honesty ignited something. Engineers who had been burning out started collaborating again. The design team proposed a new, more intuitive version of the user interface. The legal department offered solutions on the licensing block. It wasn't magic. It was momentum built, not on pressure, but on shared purpose. Still, another challenge loomed. A competitor had caught wind of MediaVault's success, a massive firm with global reach, deep pockets, and a ruthless history. Within days of Daniel's Tokyo deal going public, they launched their own version of predictive health software, flashy, faster, and built purely for profit. Rumors flew that they were using AI models trained unethically, cutting corners in patient data, and then came the blow. This rival firm was offering governments and hospitals a heavily discounted version of their software. It wasn't better, it was just cheaper. The kind of move that crushed innovation before it had time to bloom. Daniel's team was shaken. Investors called panicked meetings. Some began to question whether MediaVault could survive the coming storm. Hope was in the office that day too. She often came after school, curling up with a book while her father cleaned and Daniel worked. She saw the worry in everyone's eyes. That night, as Daniel walked to the elevator, Hope caught up with him. "Can I ask you something?" she said. Her voice soft. "Of course," he said, tired but attentive. "If someone takes your idea and makes it worse just to be first, does that mean they win?" Daniel thought for a long moment. "No," he said finally. "It means they're afraid." "Afraid of what?" "That the world might choose something real over something fast, something good over something easy." Hope nodded slowly, like she was filing that truth away for later. "Then maybe you just need to show people why what you made is different." Her words echoed in his mind the entire night, and by morning, he had a plan. They would invite real patients, people whose lives had been saved or transformed by MediaVault's early trial program, to share their stories publicly, on video, at conferences, online, not as marketing, but as truth. And the response, explosive. A father in Arizona shared how his daughter's stroke was caught days before symptoms appeared. A doctor in Seoul explained how the software helped him treat a high-risk patient faster than any system before. A nurse in Nairobi tearfully thanked the team for giving her clinic a tool she never thought she'd see in her lifetime. The videos went viral, not because they were polished, but because they were real. Daniel watched it unfold with quiet wonder. The product he had dreamed of, the technology he had built in the dark for years, was finally touching lives. And at the heart of it all was a moment no algorithm could copy. A little girl, in a too big blazer, standing beside a man with everything. To Lusanne, choosing to speak up, because that's the truth the world kept forgetting. Sometimes it's not the strongest or loudest who make the biggest difference, it's the ones who care the most, and dare to act. The gala in New York City was unlike anything Daniel Reeves had ever experienced. The chandelier above the marble atrium looked like falling stars frozen in time. Guests in tailored suits and flowing gowns moved through the grand hall like currents in a river, exchanging stories over glasses of champagne and sparkling cider. The entire event was a celebration of innovation and compassion, highlighting leaders who were changing the world, not just with wealth, but with wisdom and empathy. Daniel hadn't expected the invitation. When it arrived, Dan embossed card bearing the signature of Eleanor Vance, one of the most influential philanthropists in global healthcare. He thought it was a mistake, but it wasn't. Reeves Technologies was being honored for its life-saving software, and Hope, the unexpected heart of their story, was invited too. She walked beside him that night, wearing a pale blue dress and a silver hairpin that sparkled. Under the lights, her excitement was quiet, but you could see it in her eyes as they took in the city through the windows of the limo, the glowing towers reflecting her dreams back at her. Inside the gala, they were met with applause, not for fame or fortune, but for what they stood for. Yet, even among the glamour and praise, Daniel felt a tug of unease. That rival company, the one pushing a cheaper, soulless imitation of Medivo, had sent a representative to. He was sleek, polished, and made his way through the crowd, shaking hands and planting seeds of doubt. Daniel knew how these things worked. Innovation wasn't always about the best idea, it was often about who controlled the narrative. And that's where tonight mattered most. Just before dinner, Eleanor Vance stood at the podium. The room hushed as her presence commanded the space. "Tonight," she said, her voice calm but resolute, "we celebrate not only technology, but the courage behind it. I've met leaders who've spent millions to change systems but rarely have. I met someone who allowed a child to change them." She turned toward Daniel and Hope, seated quietly near the front. "Will you both join me?" Daniel stood slowly, unsure what to expect. Hope followed, gripping his hand tightly. Her fingers trembled slightly, not with fear, but with anticipation. On stage, Eleanor handed Daniel a microphone. He hesitated. Hundreds of eyes stared back, but then he saw Hope, standing beside him, her small hand still in his, and something clicked. He didn't deliver a pitch. He didn't rattle off numbers. Instead, he shared the moment it all changed when Hope stepped into that boardroom. Not because she was told to, but because she wanted to help. She wasn't trained, Daniel said, his voice steady. She wasn't hired. She didn't have a resume or a title, but she listened. She learned. She believed. And in that moment, when everything we built was about to fall apart, she stepped forward with nothing but courage and kindness and saved us. The room was silent. Then Hope spoke. "I just wanted to help my dad's friend," she said softly, "because I knew it was important, and because I thought maybe I could do something, even if I was small." A pause, then applause, swelling, sincere, the kind of applause that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with truth. That night changed everything again. The rival company's representative left early. Their software, now seen for what it was, hollow replica, began to lose traction. Clinics and hospitals demanded MED and Volt instead, not just because it worked, but because it meant something. In the weeks that followed, Daniel's team grew, not just in size, but in heart. They hired developers from underfunded schools. They created internships for students like Hope Kids, who saw the world not through titles, but through potential. Marcus, once the janitor sweeping empty halls, now managed the community outreach arm of the company, traveling to schools and shelters, speaking about resilience, second chances, and how sometimes the most overlooked people hold the most powerful stories. And as for Hope, she was invited to speak at a youth innovation summit in London. She was nervous, of course, but before boarding the plane, she told her father something that brought him to tears. "I used to think heroes had to be big and loud," she said, "but I think heroes are just people who show up when it matters most, even if their voice shakes." Daniel wrapped her in a hug. "You showed up, sweetheart. You always do." That night, as the plane soared into the stars, Daniel stared out the window and thought back to the beginning, to that single moment of crisis when everything had nearly fallen apart because no one could speak the language needed to bridge a gap. And then, a child did. Not because she had to, but because she could. Because sometimes, the smallest voice isn't just the loudest teeth, the most unforgettable. 3 years later, the world no longer remembered Reeves Technologies as a struggling startup on the verge of collapse. It had become a name spoken with respect in boardrooms, hospitals, and classrooms alike, not just for its groundbreaking software, but for the story behind its rise. Yet, for Daniel Reeves, the measure of success wasn't in the company's soaring valuation or its newly acquired global headquarters. It was in a smaller, quieter place, one that lived in his memory and his heart. It was in the voice of a 7-year-old girl who had once stood beside him in his darkest hour and turned on a light. Hope was 10 now. She was taller, still curious, still fiercely kind. Her world had grown bigger. Summer science camps, newspaper interviews, and letters from children around the world who had heard her story, and felt brave enough to try something new. But something else had changed. The night after her London summit speech, Hope asked Daniel a question he hadn't expected. "Do you think this is the best it'll ever be?" He'd paused. "What do you mean?" "I mean, we did something good. But what if we stop trying after this? What if we forget to keep helping people?" It was in that moment Daniel realized she didn't see the last 3 years as a finish line, but as the beginning of something more. So they made a promise to each other. They would never forget how it started. Never forget that one act of courage, one decision to care, could change more than a business. It could change lives, and that promise became the seed for something even greater. They launched an initiative called BridgeSpeak. It wasn't just about translating languages anymore. It was about translating stories, dreams, barriers, and opportunities. BridgeSpeak offered free tech education to children in underserved communities across the world, starting in places where voices were too often ignored. It provided laptops, coding camps, and mentorships. But most importantly, it taught kids what Hope already knew, deep in her bones, that no one is too small to make a difference. The first BridgeSpeak hub opened in a remote village in Nepal. A week later, another launched in rural Brazil, and then South Africa, Romania, Vietnam. The mission wasn't to teach children how to change the world. It was to show them they already could. Hope and Daniel traveled together, not as CEO and daughter, but as partners in purpose. In a sun-drenched classroom in Ghana, they met a boy named Samuel who, after one coding session, said he wanted to build an app to help his grandmother remember her medicine schedule. In a school nestled between rice fields in the Philippines, a girl named Lyra created a game that taught kids how to recycle. And in a quiet neighborhood in Detroit, a 12-year-old refugee from Syria used BridgeSpeak to tell her story for the first time without fear. Every time they heard a child speak with confidence, with clarity, with that unmistakable spark in their eyes, Daniel would glance at Hope, and she would always smile, the same quiet smile, the one she wore the day everything changed. But even as their mission grew, the pressure mounted again. A major media company approached Daniel with an offer to buy out Reeves Technologies, one that would secure him a lifetime of ease. They promised global expansion, limitless resources, and control over BridgeSpeak's message. It was the kind of offer most people only dream of. But Daniel wasn't most people anymore, and he had learned the most valuable things in life weren't for sale. He turned the offer down. Instead, he and Hope doubled down. They brought BridgeSpeak into refugee camps, rural villages, and forgotten cities. They created a platform where children not only translated languages but turned their stories into action. That and one quiet morning, standing in front of the original janitor's closet where Marcus once worked, now transformed into a glass-walled museum of hope, Daniel received a call. The Nobel Committee. They had heard the story. They had seen the impact. Daniel Reeves had been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. Not for inventing software, but for helping give a voice to those the world had too often silenced. As the ceremony approached, the world's eyes turned once again to the man who had once paced a hallway in desperation, and to the girl who had walked into history without even knowing it. But the moment that defined them wasn't the speech, the award, or the photos. It was afterward, in the quiet corner of a park in Oslo, where Hope leaned her head on Daniel's shoulder and whispered, "We didn't just save the company, did we?" Daniel smiled, brushing a strand of her hair from her eyes. "No, sweetheart. We helped the world remember something it forgot. That even the smallest voice," she said, finishing the thought, "can carry the loudest truth. Because sometimes miracles don't look like lightning bolts or grand gestures. Sometimes they wear hand-me-down sweaters, carry storybooks in their backpacks, and walk into boardrooms just to help a friend. And sometimes the people we overlook, janitors, the daughters, the quiet ones, hold the very key to a future we couldn't imagine without them. The world wouldn't remember Reeves Technologies just as a tech company. It would remember it as a movement, born from desperation, built on courage, led by love, and inspired by the girl who spoke when no one else could."